Welcome to our fall program of the Minnesota Peace Initiative. And I haven't had a chance to meet all of you, but I've met quite a few of you in the last half hour, and I would say we have quite a number of returning members and attendees, so we're very pleased to have you. And for all of you new members, new attendees, we're very glad to welcome you to our first program. We hope you enjoy it as much as your fellow attendees who come back for each of our programs. For those of you who are attending your first program, just let me tell you a little bit about who we are and why we do these programs. Norway, as I hope all of us know, is a trusted global peacemaker. And therefore, as part of the Norway House, the Minnesota Peace Initiative provides a forum for thoughtful discussion of current issues and conflicts. We hope this is a place where we can all listen and learn from each other. And the goal of our Minnesota Peace Initiative is to delve deeply into challenging global issues, and the one we're going to discuss tonight is certainly one of those. We love the comment of James Madison, who said, "We need a well-informed electorate in order to have an effective democracy." And so we bring to you well-informed experts so that they will share their knowledge and their insights so that all of us can become better informed about the important issues of today. For those of you who were here at the spring program, you know it was about global warming, and we had such a positive response to that. Literally, we had people coming up afterwards and following up with us, saying that climate change and global warming are such an important topic, and it's so broad, and keep digging a little bit deeper on the subject. So there was great interest in the subject, and as we can see from attendance tonight, that interest continues. So we spent some time thinking about what specific angle or what specific part of this topic could we address, and we came up with an interesting proposition, which is maybe we should look in our own backyard. And what are we doing right here in Minnesota and in the Midwest that's contributing to global warming? And I think I can speak for our committee. We were quite surprised to find out that we actually are a major contributor to global warming. And that comes from the way that we farm and the way we handle the soil and the farming methods, and how those farming methods also integrate with big ag, which is a really important part of our economy here. And so we thought it would be really interesting to not only learn more about it, since most of us were quite surprised, but also that it would be important for us to acknowledge, as I think we might have in our spring program on climate change and global warming, that it's really easy to point your finger at somebody else. And it's really easy to wonder why those countries that rely on petroleum products like oil and gas for their economy, or those people who are burning down the Amazon, why don't they realize what they're doing, and why don't they change? Why don't they realize that what they're doing is harming all of us? When in fact, we need to ask ourselves the same thing. What are we doing? How are we contributing to global warming and to climate change? Can we change? Can we change and do it in a way that maintains our strong economy from agriculture? And that led us to our topic here tonight. I hope you thought the title was provocative. We wanted to get your interest, and so we appreciate trying to be clever as we try to lay out our topics. But I want to make it really clear that while it's an important topic, we are not here to be critical of farmers. I am a farmer's daughter, and I come from a farm that's now 130 years in the same family. I've met several people out here who all have some linkage to the farm economy. And so we're not here to criticize farmers. We're not here to criticize big ag. We're not even here to criticize all of us as consumers, because we have a role to play. We have become so reliant on, let's admit it, cheap food, that it's a real question as to how willing we are to make some sacrifices along with farmers and big ag and anybody and all the other stakeholders who are going to have to change. It doesn't mean change for the worst, it could be change for the better, and we hope that's what we're going to hear tonight. But we're not going to move from being a polluter to being a economy that helps protect the environment without change for all the stakeholders, including us as consumers. So we have brought together tonight 3 individuals, 3 experts, who I can tell you from speaking with them as we prepared for the program, are not flamethrowers or finger pointers or anything else. They are experts deeply steeped in the issues, deeply committed to change, and change that can be viable for the future of our economy, and very willing to work with all the stakeholders in terms of how do we bring about the change needed. We're going to begin our program, as we have done not for all of our programs, but for many of our programs, especially on a topic like this, which I think this is a topic, probably more than any of the other topics we've had, this is a topic in which a lot of us out here in the audience are starting kind of from ground zero, not knowing that much about the whole concept of what is our farming doing, what is regenerative agriculture, just the whole topic. So we're going to start out with Greg Bohrer, who is the Agricultural Program Director at the Environmental Initiative, who's going to, as we say, kind of give us a tutorial, kind of set the table for the 2 speakers, who will then drill down from different perspectives in terms of the subject matter of our program. So Greg's going to present a tutorial, kind of helping you get well grounded in the topic, and so that we're all better able to ask questions at the end of the evening. We're then going to turn to our 2 panelists, Reginaldo Haslett-Marroquin. I say it right? Marroquin? Good. I practiced. He's the CEO at Regenerative Agriculture Alliance, and Dr. Nick Jordan, who is with the Department of Agronomy and Plant Genetics at the University of Minnesota. Each of them will address the opportunities that we have before us. What are the alternative practices? Are they viable? How can we escalate the scale of these practices so that they become ultimately the new operating model for how we farm and deal with our land, our water, and our air? Our goal is to get all of us, as I said, to think about the responsibility we have right here in Minnesota, in the Midwest, in agricultural lands all around the world. What environmental damage are we doing, and how do we turn that around so that we are contributing to the health of the entire environment? We will conclude the program with a Q&A, and that's exceedingly important. We get our best questions from the audience, and I'm going to urge you, as I do at every program, members of our team will be walking around with 3x5 cards. Feel free to write down your questions, hand them back to the team members, and they'll bring them up, and I will ask the questions of the panelists, trying to get the themes that are coming through from your questions. I do want to indicate that we're going to have a slightly different format to the program, in that we generally have each of our panelists give a 10-minute opening, but Dr. Jordan has chosen he's not going to do a 10-minute opening. He's going to introduce slides and give more complete answers to some of the questions that he and I have worked out. So it's going to be a little change from our usual format. So I'm going to invite Greg up. When Greg is done, I'm going to invite Reginald, who to everybody is Reggie, to speak. And then Dr. Jordan will join Reggie up on the panel, and we will begin with our questions. Dr. Nick Jordan one of our panelists, is a professor of agronomy and plant genetics at the University of Minnesota in St. Paul. And there he conducts research on agricultural ecology and agroecosystems. Dr. Jordan joined the University of Minnesota as a faculty member in 1994. He's a graduate of Harvard College with a degree in biology, and he holds a PhD from Duke in the fields of botany and genetics. He co-directs the Forever Green initiative at the University of Minnesota, which is an initiative to develop and commercialize a set of new crops that will advance the forever green agriculture. He'll be telling us more about that in his presentation in his remarks. He has written and spoken extensively on the topic of regenerative agriculture. He's a member of many professional organizations that are committed to conservation and to the protection of the environment. Reginaldo Haslett-Marroquin is the president and CEO of Regenerative Agriculture Alliance. He is a native of Guatemala, having come to the United States in 1992. He's committed to developing innovations in the regenerative agriculture system, particularly in the raising of poultry. At the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance, he works in system strategies for global applications. He received his agronomy degree from the Central National School of Agriculture and studied at the Universidad de San Carlos in Guatemala. He graduated from Augsburg University here in Minneapolis with a major in international business administration. He has recently authored a book entitled In the Shade of the Green Man, My Journey from Poverty and Hunger to Food Security and Hope. He speaks extensively around the world on not only his specific area of regenerative poultry systems, but also on national and international initiatives needed to improve current agricultural practices. Before I introduce Greg and ask him to come to the podium, I want to clarify our schedule. I always want to make this very clear. We like to start on time and we end on time. So our program will end promptly at 8:30. We always have the most generous speakers, and they will stay and answer questions, and we have many people stay after and ask questions at all of our programs. So I just want to assure you that if you don't get your question answered, or if you want to ask deeper questions or follow up on questions with our speakers, they will be available after the program. So to start, I would like to introduce Greg Bohrer. Greg is a graduate of St. Olaf College with a double major in environmental studies and political science. He's the director of the agriculture program of the Environmental Initiative, a Minneapolis-based nonprofit. He organizes and leads multi-sector collaborations to help farmers implement sustainable practices on row crop acres, ranging from local collaborations to nationwide initiatives, such as the recent establishment of a Midwest row crop collaborative. Prior to joining the Environmental Initiative, Greg worked on natural resources issues for Senator Klobuchar, both on the Capitol Hill and in her Minneapolis office. So now it is my pleasure to turn the program over to Greg.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you to the Norway House and the Minnesota Peace Initiative for having me today. My name is Greg Bohrer, and I am with Environmental Initiative. And I was tasked today to take 10 minutes, and I'm going to time myself because, again, I respect everybody's time as well, to give you an overview of Minnesota agriculture in relation to climate change. 10 minutes is not nearly enough. I'm glad you agree. So what I'm going to do is my job is to make you, in 10 minutes, dangerous enough to ask really good questions of the panelists that come after, and ask really good questions of the powers that be, right? Whether it's big food and agricultural companies, the policymakers, whatever. I want to make you dangerous, and I have 10 minutes to do that. So just get going into it. So Environmental Initiative, we are one of those organizations that you've never heard of, but we're in the background everywhere. We do multi-sector collaboratives, which means bringing together everybody from business to academia to nonprofits to whatever. It's a government. We'll bring anybody together that has a stake in the problem and wants to be part of the solution. And we do that across a lot of different issue areas, but we do that particularly for my work in agriculture. So this is just a list of the people who are formally in partnership with us. You don't need to read this. This is a long list. It's just there to overwhelm you. So the point being that we work with everybody from, McDonald's and Walmart down to the Rice County Soil and Water Conservation District. We work on a lot of different scales, but the point is that we work with people who want to be part of the solution and organizations who are interested in changing the system so that it works for farmers, it works for the natural resources we depend on, and it works for our communities. And we'll do that anywhere. One of the more recent ones that we've established is the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative, which includes a lot of those national food and agriculture companies on the left-hand side, as well as folks like the Nature Conservancy, the Environmental Defense Fund, and the World Wildlife Fund, which is really about changing the entire system of Midwest agriculture to, again, align to those principles. So, climate change in agriculture, the basics, right? Because that's what we have time for here. Minnesota is an agricultural state. And this is not news to anybody, right? But it's worth repeating that we are not just an agricultural state, we are one of the agricultural states. We have 26 million acres of farmland, which is the majority of the land in Minnesota. We are number 4 for crops. We are number 5 in total agricultural production. So if you think about that, it's like California, Texas, Iowa, some other state I don't remember, and then Minnesota, right? Like, we're pretty far up there. And so because of that, it's not only very important to our economy, it's important to our way of life, our social fabric, but it's also important to, when we think about climate change, we have a role and a responsibility more than most to think about agriculture in that context and what is it that we need to do to combat the threat of global climate change. And to give you a little bit more information on that, so this comes from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and this is a compilation of all the different greenhouse gas emissions by sector that we have in Minnesota. And the U.S. nationally, agriculture is 9%. That green bar is Minnesota's. That's agricultural share in Minnesota. It's big. Right? This is one of the big things that we need to work on. And particularly, unfortunately, it's agricultural, forestry, and land use, so I'm going to try and break it down just a little bit for you. That's just crop agriculture, row crop agriculture, growing corn, beans, wheat, whatever, the activities that are engaged in that. I'm not counting like the fuel used to bring the grain from the field to the elevator. I'm not counting all that stuff. I'm just talking about the growing of the crops, okay? That's that contribution to greenhouse gas emissions in Minnesota. And that can be from fertilizer. So when you apply nitrogen fertilizer, now we're getting a little weedy, okay? We're gonna get into the weeds here. When you apply nitrogen fertilizer, that goes one of 3 directions. What we want is to go into the crop, right? The crop needs that to grow. It needs that nitrogen to grow nice and shiny and green. The other directions are it can go down into our groundwater. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about nitrate issues and contamination of groundwater and surface water. Or it can go up into the air. Bacteria in the soil can convert that nitrogen to nitrous oxide, and that is a very, very, very potent greenhouse gas. And that's a waste, unfortunately. The other big contribution in that box is soil carbon. So the organic matter in soil is carbon-based. And so when you flip that soil over or you expose that soil to the atmosphere, that carbon reacts through a bunch of different processes and turns into carbon dioxide, and then poof, no more carbon in the soil, we have carbon in the atmosphere. And that's bad, right? That's CO2, and that's a greenhouse gas. Then there's this box, which unfortunately was not labeled. I tried, didn't work. And this box is animal agriculture, it's livestock. And primarily we're talking about, in Minnesota, cows and pigs, and cows in particularly from both ends, okay, of the animal. Are we clear? I don't know what that means. All right, cool. And then from pigs, it's just on the one side of the animal. And that is manure pits that release methane. It's cows burping. Because of the ruminant process, they produce methane. And I'm going to kind of break down each one of those because those are the big categories that we're talking about. When we talk about agriculture and climate change, we could talk about fuel use, we could talk about a lot of other things, but for the 10 minutes, quickly running out, I need to get you dangerous. So we're going to talk about these three things. So first, nitrogen fertilizer. This is one of the big variable costs for a farmer. This is, if not the biggest variable cost for a farmer. And if you think, putting yourself in a farmer's mindset, if it's going into the air, it's going into the water, that is a waste, right? They paid for that, whether they raised the livestock to produce the manure that you sprout on the land, or whether you're paying for the, just nitrogen fertilizer that was produced using fossil fuels, you paid for it in some way as a farmer. And the idea that it's going up or down and not into the crop is a waste. That's money going right out the door. And so when you have inefficiencies in the system like that, where it directly hits the pocketbook, you also have opportunities because there's economics behind it. And a lot of technologies have come online very recently to help that farmer dial in that nitrogen fertilizer application so that they're putting just what that crop needs, when it needs it, when it's growing, and when it's demanding that fertilizer. And it's pretty amazing. We can get down to like a meter square grid of plants on a field, and that farmer can go across the field and have the applicator out back changing how much it applies at each little square, right? That's pretty impressive technology. And it's on the rate of adoption. You can see all those lines going to the right. That's adoption of variable rate application. That's the trajectory that technology is on. Farmers are adopting it because there's an easy cost-benefit analysis to be had when you're thinking about, okay, I'm paying this much for fertilizer and I'm losing this much on it. So that's an opportunity. We're getting there. I'd say, this is a little bit out of date, and we're probably more in like the across all acres and all farmers, more in like the 40 to 50% are using variable rate application and dialing it in, but we're not there yet. That's 40 to 50%. That's glass half full, right? So next piece, livestock. Getting back to the cow burps. So that's a big portion of our emissions. That's a huge portion of the greenhouse gas emissions for the United States as a whole. And this is where it gets hard, because how do you keep a cow from burping? And that's not a joke. That's really legitimately a question. I don't know. I don't know how you keep a cow from burping up methane. And there are very smart people working on this with feed supplements and different ways of changing around feed, but it's hard. And so that one's going to require a lot of innovation and a lot of disruption to tackle, but there are people working on it. The other piece is those manure lagoons. The cows poop. They put all the poop in one area. They call it a lagoon or a pit. And as it sits there, it releases methane gas. And so there are different technologies that are out there. Methane digesters, you can cap that pit, and you can capture that methane, and you can digest it through a lot of processes that I don't quite understand, and it comes out as natural gas. And that's great, but it's very expensive. We're talking on hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases, or millions of dollars depending on the size of the farm, to capture that. And the bit on the right there is that there's not a lot of money to do that right now. Farmers are hurting really, really badly. And in particular, the ones who would be most interested in adopting that kind of technology are the ones hurting the most. We're at the lowest farm income in 23 years, and dairy farmers are going out of business every single day. The farmer in the middle there, that's actually my daughter, the one in the pink, the cutest one, obviously. That's my friend Paul. He's a dairy farmer. His family's been doing it for 100 years. He's been showing champion. His daughters have been showing champion Holsteins at the Minnesota State Fair. He got it out of the business this year. He's done. It was really sad. It's who he is as a dairy farmer. And he just can't make it work anymore. So when we talk about solutions, it's important to keep in mind that somebody has to pay for those solutions, right? Somebody has to do it. And in a lot of cases, The solutions may not be economically viable, and so we're asking a lot of farmers to do that and make that happen. So the last piece here is about soil carbon, and this is where these guys are going to get way more into it. Nick and Reggie are they're experts in this, but I want to say that soil carbon is one of those few places where we can actually take the carbon out of the atmosphere, right? You can do that when you plant a tree. That's a really big piece, but the second piece is you can put it back into the soil by using practices that not only keep the soil undisturbed, but they put living roots in it. So those roots are just taking carbon out of the atmosphere and just shoving it into the soil because they're living and they're growing and they're grabbing that carbon. And you can diversify crops, which helps with the soil and its health, and it can store more carbon. There's a lot of different things, but the point of the chart on the bottom there is we're pretty far away from the full adoption of these practices that we need to have. Cover crops is an amazing thing. Cover crops are those living roots all year round, even if it's not a crop that you're harvesting. And Nick will go into more of this. But it's only 3% of Minnesota crop acres. That says to me 97% of opportunity, but we're pretty far behind. And intensive tillage, where you're turning the soil over many, many, many times in a growing season or a year, that's more than 50% of Minnesota acres. That means that every time you turn that soil over, that carbon is going poof, right back up into the air. And that's a problem. What is the exciting part is that the change is really good. From 2012 to 2017, 33% improvement in adoption of no-till, 34% improvement in adoption of reduced till. There's opportunities here, and we're getting there. So what can you do, right? This is the dangerous part, right? This is where you actually become dangerous. Stop wasting food. It's expensive. Join the Clean Plate Club. My daughter's part of it. She's really good at it. Treat it with respect. 40% of food in the U.S. is never eaten, and that means that 40% of the carbon emissions were there and not needed, right? So just finish your food. Treat it with respect. This is pretty basic stuff. I'm not saying that you don't. I'm just saying we all need to. And then this one's a little bit more tricky. How many of you have agricultural land in your family? Raise it high. It's okay. Okay, now how many of you have had, keep your hands up, I didn't say put them down. How many of you have had a discussion with your farmer, your operator, your tenant, however you want to define it, about soil health, sustainability, all that stuff? Keep your hands up if you've done that. This is an opportunity to do a lot of good. Farmers are interested in having this conversation. They're just afraid of you. No joke. It's your land. You can do what you want with it, and they're afraid of having that discussion and you taking that land away from them. So approach that with a mindset of we can work on this solution together, and you're going to have an amazing conversation with your farmer. And the last piece is be an unreasonable consumer. Tell big food, big ag, that you want good food, you want it to taste good, you want it to be nutritious, and you want it to be produced in a way that aligns with your values, and don't take no for an answer. That'll change the system just by itself. So, do you feel dangerous? Yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope this was helpful, and that's it. I'm out.
Thank you very much, Greg. I think they even look more dangerous, so I think you accomplished your goal. Okay, I'm going to invite Reggie up to give his opening, and he too is going to be using slides as part of his opening. So,
awesome! Thank you very much. This is a very unique opportunity to be here. Being included in this kind of conversation is one of the great privileges I get to enjoy these days, and good to see a lot of familiar faces. I'm going to go at this from a very different perspective. I mean, the reason we do all of these things that we do and we seem to not care about it is because we come from a very long, multi-decade, I mean, actually more than hundreds of thousands of years of thinking in a colonizing way. We like to take things, we like to control things, we like to manage things, we like them straight, we like them orderly, we want them on time, we want all kinds of things, and unfortunately that's the way we have been treating the earth, and that is not okay. It doesn't work. And we are knowing now how it doesn't work, and it's very dangerous. You thought you were dangerous? No. The cyclones, the storms, all of that, that's dangerous. And we haven't even seen the beginning of it. So how do we go about this, turning agriculture from a problem into a solution? We really have to decolonize the way we think about this. You know, the foundation of this is that we tend to think of agriculture as this thing that other people do, as this business that we have to run and all of that, without realizing that it's so central to so many fundamental human survival and needs. Food, peace, peace, and all the stuff that we sometimes ignore, like indigenous knowledge, the spiritual renewal, the harmony that brings us back into balance in our heads to be able to enjoy each other. All of that actually comes from the land. Did you know that trees expel over 450 chemicals that actually are responsible for the way your brain actually works? That's why forest bathing is so effective when you're under stress. Taking your shoes out in an organic field, there's no chemicals, so centering for you. We are part of it, and we have forgot about it because we don't think of it as part of us. We have come to colonize the land. And that is fundamentally why we ended up where we are today. And we have to start thinking about that radically. So this colonizing approach leads to some very difficult things that we have to deal with right now. It ends up in extractive and exploitative practices. It compromises the very foundation of agriculture, which is really, truly just simply energy transformation. If you think of it, all we do in farming is take non-edible energy in the form of those gases that we were talking about, and then we steward that process. So at the other end of it, we got carrots and cows and chickens and eggs and all of that. We didn't do anything. Nature designed marvelous systems that have been doing that for billions of years, and then we come here arrogantly and say that we can improve on that, and look at where it leads us. That is fundamental. We compromise that beautiful design by the way we approach this from a colonized perspective. We got corporate-sponsored, government-supported, large-scale disruption of countries like my own country, in Guatemala and Mexico, all across Latin America, that had destroyed communities, traditions, culture, food security, food sovereignty and native nations. All of that came because we needed to create some dependency so that we could extract more profits out of those communities, just like from you as a consumer. We need to separate you from the farmer so you don't know where your food is coming from, so you're okay with cheap food. That's fundamental principles of colonization, and we just don't recognize that. We have legalized the abuse of the land, the exploitation of labor, and market manipulation in this field that we are in. We have disproportionate concentration of system-level ownership and control where us farmers and you consumers no longer have a voice. And that really results in a disregard for natural systems and disregard for the very indigenous knowledge and the real science that is actually now starting to come back because we needed to solve the problems we created. The end result of all of this is really the climate disruption we are experiencing, the social collapse that many communities, especially those migrating across borders, are experiencing, and war and conflict. So we are at the Minnesota Peace Initiative. We really have to think deeply about how agriculture is part of the war machine. Now, how do we go about fixing some of this? Here's my story. First, we have to be subversive. It's easy for a Guatemalan, of course, to be subversive. That's how we were bred. In this case, it's going nature-based. Nature is beautiful, and it can do all of the stuff we need, deliver all the food we want, all of the good food that we were talking about, all of that, nature can do it for us, as long as we let it do its job. We have to build processes with integrity and with real commitment. That makes you an insurgent, if you're doing that. Now you can start feeling really dangerous. You are subversive, you're insurgent. That results in what? In revolutionary activities. If we band together to create scale management of these issues, and we band together with the farmers as consumers, we really create the revolutions that are effective. Not screaming in the streets, that's important, but it's not very effective at actually changing the internal structures of the very things that are causing the problems. And then, of course, being adaptable, agile, makes us evolutionarily capable. And then we arrive at that uncompromising destination that we call regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is not just a bunch of practices, it's a way of thinking. Now, here's the example. I'm the chicken guy, okay? I accepted that a few years ago. I used to be the coffee guy, then I was the bean guy, now I'm chicken guy. And it's okay. We are using poultry because it allows us to enter the system from a very practical perspective, not because I like chickens or anything like that. It's just simply, you can't succeed at tangling with everything. You have to pick one entry point, and for us, if you're gonna be subversive and revolutionary, you gotta pick an entry point that got the maximum potential impact and got the minimum effort to get you there. You spend 90% of the time doing the work, only 10% defending it. That's central to insurgencies. Okay, so chickens give us that opportunity. It's a $45 billion industry, but remember, chicken is a jungle fall. To manage energy on the chicken, all you do is you put the energy in, you put it into a natural environment where it's free-ranged, you capture all of that carbon that is sitting in the air and all of those chemicals, you put them through a process of transformation in the paddocks where the chickens are ranged, you harvest some of that energy, meat, eggs, hazelnuts, elderberries, all of that we plant with them. You take all of the byproducts, you put that back into the system to restore all of the carbon that you're gonna harvest. You take the excess energy, you move it out, so you don't have excess manure sitting around, polluting the land, the water, and all of that. You move it to extensive landscapes, which we are now managing across southeastern Minnesota. You put that energy into the land, you harvest again, you put that energy back into the system, and on it goes, to the extent that we only harvest between 20 and 30% of the total energy we capture for free out of the air. 70% goes back into the system to ignite the next cycle. It really isn't rocket science. It's agriculture science. You get real efficiencies and real ecological solutions at scale. And the chickens look beautiful, the landscape looks beautiful, the soil gets back to life. The results are really four-dimensional. We are economically very viable and very low risk. We are ecologically, complete. We're putting perennial crops, cleaning the water, restoring the landscapes, purification, all of those things we talk about happens as a result of this. We are socially fully compatible because of the way we design the units for small farmers, for new farmers, for large farmers. Anybody can join the system. We're spiritually connecting with it. That makes us four-dimensionally. That's the foundation of regenerative agriculture. That's what makes it regenerative. And we're also good marketers. So we created a national brand that we are now deploying so that we can put this poultry across the landscape all across the country, starting with southeastern Minnesota and starting with Birchwood, December 20. Just go and check us out, Birchwood Cafe. But it's not just about the chicken. It's about linking the poultry production in the center with all of these other enterprise sectors that together give us a landscape approach to rebuilding the rural economy, integrating all those sectors, and actually building industry-level capacity to bring back the full package behind the farmers, behind the consumers, and behind this kind of food production. That's a production unit for you. Doesn't have to look brown. And it produces incredible amounts of output. This is a design of one of the farms. Taking care of the farmer means you give them the opportunity to make an income. Out of 6 acres with 4 production units, we're able to gross over $257,000. You who have land, do the numbers. At a regional level, we are now deploying enough production to meet around $12 million worth of market share. That brings us to building a regenerative brand, building all the related enterprises, and perennializing the landscape. Now, arriving at this uncompromising destination requires that we build coalitions. This is why we built the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance. These coalitions are going on with Native communities so that we can reach significant market shares. 5% is the market share we are actually aiming for. That means 500 million broilers, 4 billion eggs, 2.5 million acres, 10 producing regions. All of those 10 producing regions across the country are already signed up, and we are now developing them with the leadership in southeastern Minnesota. So, we have a problem, yes, but we have a massive solution. And if you want me to elaborate further, I'll show you how we can draw down all the 127 gigatons of extra CO2 that we have in the air right now, that put us at 415 parts per million of CO2. We could draw it down to 280 parts per million right here in Minnesota. We don't need the world to change. But we do need to change how we see the landscape and stop colonizing it. Thank you.
When Reggie started, I thought I was going to have to take back my statement that we didn't have any flamethrowers on the on the dais tonight. But he circled around to doing what we all need to do, which is to actually role model and start creating a solution, and then let's see how we can scale it up to accomplish what we really need to do, is to bring that immense amount of carbon out of the air to cool the earth and get us back into the level of safe carbon in the air that we are aiming for. So thank you very much. So we're going to have a few questions, and I am cognizant of the time, and so I'm going to take about 20 minutes and have a couple of questions with each of our panelists, and then we will have a half an hour, about 25 minutes of questions from the floor. So we have a number of members of our team who can circle around and pick up your cards. So as you think of questions, or if you already have some questions, feel free to start writing them down and submitting them, and we'll begin those at about 8 o'clock. So, Dr. Jordan, Nick, you gave me permission early on to call you that. I'd like to give you a little time, since you wanted to incorporate your opening into answering specific questions. And the first one we talked about is, we're throwing the term regenerative agriculture around a lot. Would you kind of define it and kind of get the whole audience on the same level of understanding of what, at least from the academic standpoint, you believe it is?
Well, good evening. It's such a pleasure to be part of this very valuable discussion. So, indeed, let's talk a little bit about this idea of regenerative agriculture, and I merely want to underscore what my friend Rehi has presented to you as the concept of regenerative agriculture. So I want to make 2 points. Regenerative agriculture is all about growing things. It's about gardening. And there are a couple of things that need to be grown in this garden. So thing number one are the living systems that are in fact the thing that is most distinctive about our planet as far as we know. So the little diagram that you're seeing up there is from an emerging form of agriculture called permaculture, which is in fact at the heart of the innovative chicken farming schemes that Rehi has just presented us with. And I think that all of us simply looking at that image can understand what's meant by a living system. So what do you see there? You see a bunch of plants. You see tall plants and short plants and plants that have root systems of various sorts. And you can picture, I think, how those plants would fit together in a community of plants, essentially, that do very important things. So with high efficiency, they capture sunlight. With very high efficiency, they capture the nutrients, the very nutrients that Greg Bohrer mentioned as being rather on the loose in our current agriculture, creating all kinds of problems. That kind of scheme that you see up there doesn't really let any nitrogen escape its grasp, pretty much. It also, I think you can imagine, would be fantastic habitat for all manner of living creatures, from all kinds of soil organisms to all sorts of creatures, great and small, that inhabit that community of plants that you see there. So that living system produces, it uses the basic resources of soil and nutrients and water and sunlight with great efficiency. And so that's kind of what we mean by a living system. So regenerative agriculture is all about constructing those living systems in our farms and on our farmed landscapes. And it differs from organic agriculture and sustainable agriculture, which are aligned and related traditions, but which don't have the same explicit commitment to regenerating living systems, to growing living systems, which I will again liken to gardening. It's basically a matter of gardening. So here is an image of a regenerative agriculture at a sort of landscape scale. So we're looking out here and we're seeing, we won't spend time on the details of this, but I want you to see that we have an interesting spatial pattern here. We have design thinking. I was chatting with my friend, Dewey, and longtime co-conspirator Dewey Thorbeck, about the importance of design thinking and what we need to do in our agriculture going forward. So this is a designed landscape in which we have plants doing work of various sorts that are intended to, on the one hand, to produce something, but on the other hand, to sustain and continually regenerate living systems. So that is of the essence of regenerative agriculture. But that's only one half of it. So if we're talking about gardeners, we have to talk, about gardening, we have to talk about the gardeners too, right? So we have to talk about the people and the communities and the spirit and soul of those communities that Rehi lifted up in his comments. So regenerative agriculture is also about restoring the communities that care for these living systems. So regenerative agriculture is very interested in new forms, or actually ancient forms, of social organization that have the potential to regenerate communities as well as living systems. And so cooperative models of all sorts are of great interest to regenerative agriculture. This is an example. I don't speak Dutch or Frisian, which I guess is the accent of the dialect of Dutch that's relevant here, but this is the Noordelijk Friesk Walden Co-op. This is an organization of over 1,000 dairy farmers in a particular region in the northeast of the Netherlands that had a very distinctive historical landscape of small fields divided up with hedgerows. They were put under pressure from not particularly well conceived environmental policies coming from the Dutch government that attempted to enforce a sort of top-down solution to especially issues with nitrogen. And in response, they formed a co-op of dairy farmers that said, we have better ideas about how to manage all these things because we've lived here for hundreds of years. And here's what we propose. And because they had collective power, because there were 1,000 of them, they were able to work something out with the central government. And that illustrates the kind of social organization that is essential. And they figured out a way to continue their way of farming and their beloved hedgerows that is working out quite well. So I'm addressing this question of what is regenerative agriculture by pointing out that it's about living systems, but it's also about the people. It's about the garden, and it's about the gardeners.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you just Can you just follow up on, is this scalable? Because can you see a 400 or 600 or 1,000 acre farm that currently is rows of corn from road to road? Can you see them scaling up regenerative practices like you showed in your design and have an output for them that they are going to find acceptable? I mean, that's what I think we're trying to get at. Is I can certainly see the model you had for shrubs and plants and garden thing, but do you see that being scalable for large agricultural crops as well?
So what I would like to follow up with you guys a little bit then is to talk about a way forward at scale that we think is potentially scalable across the entire Midwest region. And so the work that I'm involved in, which Janet mentioned, the so-called Forever Green initiative, that is a multi-sector effort across the entire Midwest at this point, is very interested in the question of whether we can convert Midwest agriculture from essentially a large climate problem to a globally significant climate solution. And the answer is, we think, yes. And the pathway forward is fundamentally dependent on regenerative agriculture and achieving the kinds of living systems that we've seen at smaller, although replicable scales in the presentations of Rehi and myself. So let's talk a little bit about how we might move forward. So let me share with you, first of all, a fundamental idea, which we call Forever Green Agriculture in our work. So Forever Green Agriculture is based on the premise that we can have an agriculture that has living roots in the soil at all time on all farms. So that is an ideal. That's a sort of vision, that's an aspirational goal. But the point is that one of the things that we have learned from soil science is that the place that soil comes from is plants. That soil is created and maintained by plants, interestingly enough. And so the challenge then becomes, if one cares about soil, is how can one, in fact, have living roots in the soil at all times, on all farms, because that is the fundamental regenerative thing. So all of the ecosystems that we see on our planet are based on plants for the most part, that at least terrestrial ones, and they're all based on soil. So in the Forever Green initiative, we are developing new crops and also new regenerative farming systems of the sort that Rehi described so nicely, that provide our agriculture new options that are potentially viable at very large scales to achieve this regenerative agriculture. So over on the left there, you see an image of a perennial grain crop called intermediate wheatgrass, or kernza, that we are working on in this Forever Green project, which again spans many universities and other organizations across the Midwest, including Environmental Initiative and including the work that Rehi is involved in. And so we are developing this perennial grain crop that has that remarkable root system that you see, which is a powerful organ for storing carbon in the soil and also collecting the nitrogen that otherwise leaks out into the world and causes all kinds of problems. Pennycress is what we call a cash cover crop. In other words, it's a crop that's designed to fit into our corn and soybeans agriculture and to grow during the fall and survive the winter and then grow in the spring again and take advantage of the sunlight and water and nutrients that are available and which are unused in our current agriculture, causing all kinds of problems. So pennycress is a protein crop. It produces plant protein that can go into your Impossible burger. It also produces an oil that we expect to market heavily to the airlines of the world, which have committed that any expansion of their fleets after 2025 will be carbon neutral. How are they going to do that? They have to have what we call green aviation fuel. And this will be produced from crops like this pennycress that we're producing. Alfalfa is one of the most ancient crops. It, as you probably know, has been a mainstay of dairy farming for millennia. But there are all these interesting technologies about using alfalfa for human consumption. In other words, extracting protein from alfalfa and using that in our Impossible burgers right along with the pennycress. So we, in the Forever Green Initiative, are working on coming up with these new crops that enable this regenerative agriculture that's based on living roots in the soil at all times. So we're very interested in developing the economy of the Midwest. As Greg pointed out, we are an agricultural region, and we are a globally important agriculture region. And if climate change goes forward, we will be a really important region globally, because the breadbaskets of the world are not expected to fare that well under climate change, except for the Midwest, where we are expected to sustain our productivity better than any of the other major food production regions of the world. So the Midwest really, really matters. So we're interested in growing that economy with these new crops, and also providing environmental benefits, and very importantly, getting farmers paid for the environmental benefits that they create. That's very important to the gardener part of regenerative agriculture. So let me just say a few things about this vision that we are working for with these crops that we think can be grown over 150 million acres. Janet, that's the whole Midwest. So the Forever Green agriculture that we have in mind is, first of all, a climate solution. It's a fundamental climate solution because of the way that it protects soil. It is a food security solution because perennial crops are much less vulnerable to annual crops. So you guys are aware that U.S. corn production and soybean production are down 10 to 15%. Why is that? Because we had a very wet spring and a very wet fall that really messed with our whole production system that's based on annual crops that grow over the summer and have to be replanted every year. It's a vulnerable, risky way to produce food. Forever Green is a water security solution because having living roots in the soil at all times is a way of holding water in that soil. It changes soil profoundly and fundamentally, so the soil becomes a sponge capable of soaking up the big rainfalls, and equally important, holding on to water for the long droughts that we unfortunately are likely to be dealing with under climate change. It is an energy security solution because we can make room with this much more efficient agriculture that you get from having living roots in the soil all year round. We can make room for renewable energy infrastructure at scale. It would only take about 8% of the Corn Belt to come up with renewable energy for the entire electricity needs of the United States. And will we have room for that? Yes, we will, because of the inherent efficiency and resilience of Forever Green agriculture. It is an economic solution because it fundamentally increases the productivity of agriculture. If you have agriculture that's based on continuous living cover, living roots in the soil all year round, you are capturing twice as much solar energy as you do with our current agriculture that's based on growing crops only in the summer. That greatly increases the productivity pie. That greatly increases the economic potential of agriculture. And then getting back to the gardeners, getting back to the people, getting back to the communities that are essential to regenerative agriculture. Forever Green gives rural people bargaining power in their relationship with urban people, who of course are most people. Why is that? because we have the ability, through using forever green agriculture, to develop climate solutions that are based essentially on rural people providing urban people what we are going to need to survive the next 20 years or 30 years as climate change comes upon us. So we have the ability, based on a platform of forever green agriculture, regenerative agriculture, based on living roots in the soil all year round, to provide food, water, and energy security to urban populations on a rural basis, on a regional basis. And this essentially requires a whole new relationship and bargain and a connection between rural and urban people, in which the urban folks, because they have the land, are providing, again, food, water, and energy security under the duress of climate change to urban people, and urban people appropriately compensate the rural people for that. Why is this necessary? I think this picture pretty much says it all. What are we looking at? This is the city of Cedar Rapids in Iowa on the Cedar River, which is the site of some of Greg's work. And the Cedar River has flooded catastrophically in Cedar Rapids twice since the year 2000, causing $1 billion of damage in each case. Cedar Rapids is a globally significant grain handling infrastructure node, let's just say. We can't have this kind of destruction of our world by climate change. What can prevent this from happening? Changes, fundamental changes in how we farm. And we need to create this new relationship between rural and urban people so that these kinds of things don't happen. And it is by creating this interdependency, Janet, that we get to that scale. That is the fundamental economic driver that we need to make this happen. Long answer to the question.
Well, part of the, as I said in my opening, one of our goals tonight is through our three speakers, to really bring you a lot of data and a lot of information and try to really raise everybody's awareness. Many of our topics, people come in pretty well aware of the topic and they just want to know more about a particular facet, but we saw this one as where everybody's kind of starting at ground zero and wanting to learn as much as possible. Reggie, I would also like you to address the question of scale. And for instance, I'm jumping ahead a little bit because I've had the advantage of looking at the questions. So I think one of the members of our audience has raised a question that actually goes right to the scale challenge. How do we get from a model of what can work to the scale where we really change the course of the current practices we're on, or as we would say, how do we turn the ship? And they say that they are fascinated with your model and all the effort you're putting in with your plan for growing. So what about Tyson? What about a major poultry company like Tyson? Are they interested? Are they fighting you? Are they experimenting in some of the same things? I mean, some of the major players who are in, so let's just pick poultry because that's the area you're in. So would you kind of address, and you've got the microphone there, how you see your plan scaling up, but also what about the big players, and are you already interacting with them at all in terms of the way they do their current practices and how you might bring them along to yours?
Yeah, there is inherent conflict with the way the mega food corporations are structured today. I don't think the executives in those companies have much of a choice. They have to do what they have to do. They're not designed, it's not in the DNA, in the blueprint of any of these big corporations to think about consumers' health, about the health of the land, or the rights of the 50+ million workers that go home poor and broken after feeding us cheap food. All of that is so entrenched that without blaming anybody, that's what we got. And it's not something that you just go out there and change. And they can't change it either overnight because it's a massive infrastructure. So having said that, all of these companies that are actually starting to wake up to where consumers are going are starting to wonder, well, are we going to have to change? And is there an opportunity that we could do this? And they're coming to you, and they're coming to Greg. I am right now consulting, not consulting as in paid consulting, but helping 3 very large poultry companies that want to learn what we're doing. And there is no reason not to share with them. I don't need any of what they have, absolutely, except for the drinkers and the feeders and the bins and the tractors, the trucks, that kind of stuff, but not their infrastructure. I don't actually need that. In fact, their infrastructure they built is not compatible with regenerative farming. So we have to kind of build a whole bunch of it. We could work with them in other areas, and we're actively doing that. In matters of scale, what I said before, the world has changed quite a few times in its history, and it has changed on strategies that accomplish 2 very fundamental factors, or address 2 fundamental issues. The first one is that whatever you do in a scale of a $5.9 trillion industry like the food and agriculture and beverage industry, you can't just go around trying to do a little bit of everything. You will never change a thing. It just bounces off, and you will just continue to go. So the first thing you do is you pick an entry point that has the potential largest ripple disruptive impact. And poultry evolved over, eating grains and all kinds of other things that grow, like pennycress would work, like ryegrass, kernza would work for poultry, all of that. But you're not supposed to feed, in a regenerative system, you're not supposed to feed grains to cows and pigs because it disrupts the whole system. And that's how they get sick and we get sick and all of that, right? So by changing the beef system, for example, we wouldn't accomplish the kind of change we want to see. That's why we picked poultry. It's a strategic decision. Nothing against the chicken. It's just good at changing, and getting us into that magic entry point. Now, we can affect the whole grains industry by supplying our poultry system with a different form of regenerative grains. And we can control and own that. And that's critical, that control and ownership. And so the way we did this, we analyzed the whole system, and we realized that there are 3 ways we subsidize the corporate cheap food of today. One is through over $486 billion through our taxes, through the tax bill, the farm bill. The second one is by ignoring all of the ecological destruction that we have to pay for from public funds. And the third one, and the most important and the most critical in terms of strategy, is the cheap labor. And it just happens to be that over 80% of that cheap labor in the conventional food system is minority populations. And over 60% of the minorities are Hispanic, especially migrant workers, over 12 million of the 35 plus million in the food chain. And also happens that over 70% of them come from rural background and understand what I'm talking about. Which means to scale up, all we needed to do was engineer a system that was compatible culturally, economically, and aspirationally with that massive population. That's why we don't have a problem recruiting farmers. So that's it. Scaling up is not an issue of acreage, it's an issue of strategy. So strategy was what we did first, and now we're moving it along. We now have operations in British Columbia, Mexico, Guatemala, in Colombia, Brazil, South Dakota, in the Pine Ridge Reservation. Just them alone have 2.82 million acres. With the Winnebago in Nebraska, with the Meade community around Nebraska too, in Lincoln, and then in Omaha, we just partnered with a large community of displaced Maya Canjoval people who left because of the war in Guatemala and resettled in Omaha. We are launching a $6 million project there with 350 families. We are just coordinating now with the Savannah Institute in Wisconsin to deploy the southwestern Wisconsin, and with a very large network of partners in southeastern Minnesota. All of that is the result of a good strategy. And so now we start populating that. The critical thing is that we're not a threat to the conventional system. We're an opportunity for them to invest in and for them to actually start transitioning to the future of agriculture. So we're not here to threaten them. We're here to invite them into this awesome food that we can produce.
Well, I had warned our two speakers that we wouldn't get through the program without someone raising the question of, we all know that most of the farm policy is done in Washington in something called the Farm Bill. And it is, it seems antiquated already in that it doesn't recognize organic farming and other things, and it pays for things we don't want and doesn't pay for things we do want. So we've gotten several questions from the audience on how will this take place, or how will this happen? Well, let's put it another way. Are we reliant on persuading Washington and other decision makers like the Farm Bill to make radical change, or will much of this be done on the local level and it'll be a bottoms up? That's the question. Will this be a top, which will get us there faster? Trying to be a tops down and influence the Farm Bill, because the Midwest does influence the Farm Bill, or bottoms up, recognizing you'll never get the Farm Bill as the enabler. So will it come from the bottom up? And either one of you can answer, but Reggie, why don't you start? Because
Yeah, no, I grew up in an environment that was very confrontational and very polarized. We had the military right-wingers, hardliners on one side, and then on the other side it was us, the revolutionaries and the rebels and the rural communities that saw the brunt of the violence. We rose up and it worked up to a point. And then we had to understand that there were people too on the other side. And there were business people there who were protecting also what they had built over generations. Right or wrong, they had built it and they had worked for it. And so what actually eventually got us to sign in the 1996 peace agreements was many, many things, but more importantly, the realization that we needed to meet somewhere in the middle. Now, the government of this country isn't going to change its policy just because they suddenly wake up one day and realize, oh, hell, we're going to go to hell in a handbasket. That's not going to happen. Governments all over the world, except for those that completely go dictatorial and become, militarized and all of that, and don't care anymore about what people think, they shoot them when they disagree. But we're not in that kind of country. So in this country, we need both. We need the bottom up, because governments still, up to today, in this country, they do respond to what you do in the ballot box. That is, I don't know how to put it in front of you. How much people in this country disregard the absolute power that they were given by having the freedom to vote candidates into office. Like, you have no idea what it means unless you have lived through a place where you had no choice, you can't see the contrast. So we have grown so comfortable with it that we now accept things that are totally unacceptable. And then we find ways to justify that. So at this point, we absolutely need three kinds of uprisings. One, we need our politicians who represent us today to wake up. And there are many of them who are and are speaking out, and we need to support them. We need to vote out all of those that, one, deny climate change, vote them out, please. The other side is you consumers have to rise up. You got to stop polluting your bodies and stop putting your money into this pitless hole, in this bottomless pit. Sorry, that was completely. And then finally, we will, from the other side, if we can get your support, and by the way, come to us, and if you got the privilege of having investment capital, put it in our direction, please. I'll take all of the money you got. Put it there, because we need to launch these new farmers. These new crops have to find a farm. All of that requires investment. I'm not asking you to donate it, to give it away. I'm asking you to invest it in what the future of agriculture should be. Nobody in this room is sitting here without someone having imagined this place and then going on designing it and going on and building it. Well, that's what we are trying to do, imagining the future, designing what it will take us there, and hoping you will invest your money when you buy products at the store, and also your capital that you can put somewhere so that these farmers can make a good living and you can make some return on that investment. Those are the places where we have to mold them together, but it's not about creating extremes anymore. We do have to find that balance. And I'm telling you, there are folks who just don't want to go to that middle space, and we have to respect that. They need to stay where they are. The rest of us need to get together, solve this problem, and hopefully they will come around. And at least if they don't, they will have a good future for their own children too.
We have a lot of questions about your plants that you are proposing. Are they actually going to become, and first of all, I think I know the reason why we're getting 2 or 3 questions about this. Our earlier program this spring on the bigger topic of climate change and global warming was really about this is coming like a freight train. This is coming much faster than anybody anticipated. So this has more to do with the time. How much time do we have to make these transitions? So we're getting a number of questions about how far along are you and the other agronomists and at the university and other universities, but how far along are you on literally having plants ready to do the things that you've just said? I mean, are they ready for planting and being part of the current and in the next 5 years agricultural cycle, or are we 10 years away or 20 years away? What's kind of the timeline of getting what you're doing on the ground and operating?
Thank you. Okay, I want to just point out that Janet is framing this as a problem that we have to solve soon. Let's also recognize it's a really big opportunity. And this is where we have something that the whole range of our society can get behind. So as I mentioned, the breadbaskets of the world are going to be in a hurting place as climate change goes forward, with the Midwest being a significant exception to that. So we have the ability on our 150 million acres of Midwest farmland to grow a lot more stuff using the strategies that Rehi has been describing and that I've been describing. So let's look on the opportunity side of this thing and ask how quickly can we get ourselves geared up to meet that opportunity. There's also a great deal of capital in this country that is starting to realize that some of its traditional investments might not be the best idea over the next few decades. And I'm referring to, for example, investments in fossil fuels. And there's a rapidly growing field of so-called conservation finance or climate finance that is based on the recognition of opportunity to achieve attractive rates of return on capital, helping places like Cedar Rapids invest so that they don't get flooded anymore. Because if the weather forecast is true, they're going to get flooded all the time. So they have a really big interest in not having that happen. And all the companies, all the globally significant food and retail and manufacturing firms in Cedar Rapids, they don't want to be flooded either. So there's a big opportunity for agriculture to step in there, and for the individuals and firms and funds and trusts and so on that have that capital to invest in the land use change and the new forms of social organization that we need to make regenerative agriculture happen. So let's just be aware of the really big opportunity side, because that's where the dynamic for change is going to happen. So you asked about how our readiness for this. So we know how to make tasty human edible protein out of alfalfa. We've known that for decades. We know how to grow alfalfa really well. So we could grow quite a bit of alfalfa in the upper Midwest and turn it into plant protein that would be healthful protein, that would meet the protein demand that is clearly necessary for the adequate nutrition of the human population going forward. That is ready to go. We have some other crops like these so-called cash cover crops, the oil seeds that are going to produce that green aviation fuel. They're pretty much ready to go too. So what is necessary is to prototype this stuff at scale and to indicate through the ingenuity of peasants, essentially, of people who live on the land, to how we in fact put alfalfa and the winter hardy oil seeds like pennycress and the permaculture chicken schemes. How do we put all this together? That comes from the ingenuity of peasants. So that's the bottom up. Hold on one second, Rehi. And we need the 1% that has that capital that can invest in conservation finance to be informed by the peasants, and frankly, their ears are open as to what they should invest in. And so that's how we put top down and bottom up together. And so, you know, we are ready to scale this up, is the bottom line.
Right, and we have 5 minutes till closing.
Yeah, so it took us 4 years to prototype the system, test it. I grew myself 30 flocks. Once we had perfected, then we set up a timeline for new sites versus established sites. A new site goes from the day we arrived to 1.5 years later. They got full production, and they can scale that in terms of monthly increments from there forward. In Mexico, we went from one farm to networking 150 farms around it in 1.5 years. In southeastern Minnesota, 3 years ago, after all of the research and development that I did with the team at the Main Street Project in Northfield, and Main Street Project still has its own research and development farm, and that research will continue there if you want to support somebody worth it. That place is critical. And then I moved from there to deploy the system infrastructure that I'm talking about. Goes beyond R&D and community engagement. Now, at this point, it has been 3 years since we launched Regeneration Farms, which is the commercial version of the system, and it's been only a few weeks since we launched the tree range operation. But in these 3 years, we have been able to bring together over $6 million worth of underground infrastructure. We are right now pitching the $12 million investment. That is the next thing. It will take about 1.5 to 2 years to deploy that next level of deployment. That will result in a regionally branded regenerative agriculture industrial park. We will then support 250 farms and over 7,000 acres, which would allow us to produce over 500,000 pounds of hazelnuts, which we'll put back into the poultry feed after it's ground up and all of that. We'll deploy a lot of alley cropping systems, and that would allow us to consolidate at 1.18 million broilers, and at that point, about 500 million eggs of production. That can be done in the next 3 to 4 years, as long as you pull out your checkbook and put the capital in there.
Thank you very much. I promised at the beginning of the program that we would be done at 8:30, and it happens every time. Time flies, and so many questions and so little time to ask them. I think both of you have done a fabulous job of letting us know that solutions are ready. Solutions are here. Nick, I think you have repeated about 3 times, the challenge is matching capital, big capital, with the solutions. Reggie, you are really ready to go. Capital for you would just expand what you're doing rapidly. So whether it's the next peace initiative or whether it's another forum, that you guys are in forums all the time, I would encourage you to get your groups, and whatever groups you're in, to spend much more time and effort on this question of matching capital, because I spend a lot of time in New York and on Wall Street, and there is a lot of interest in what are we going to do about climate change. And nobody's talking about the government. They're all talking about how can private and philanthropic organizations, but they don't know where to place the capital, and you don't know where to find the capital. So I think somebody can bring you together. So anyway, I would suggest it. It may not be a topic for this organization, but it is a topic you guys should be really pressing on, because it's like a matchmaker must be there ready to bring these two desires together. Let's give our panelists and our moderator, our introduction, a big round of applause. We have a token of our appreciation for each of you, and it is a handmade Minnesota peace pipe made from pipestone from southwestern Minnesota. And we give it to each of our presenters as a token not only of our appreciation, but also as a symbol of what we are trying to do. We are the Minnesota Peace Initiative. We are focused on all the issues, we hope, that can help create more peace in the world, and we have a role model of that from our indigenous people right here in Minnesota. And so we have one for each of you with a plate on it commemorating tonight's event and the date. So I hope all three of you appreciate them. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for having us and for coming out tonight for this discussion. I'm very grateful, and Janet and the MPI.
I would like also, before we leave, because these events are, they take a lot of work. It's work by people who like the work, and we do it all together and we have a great time. But we have an event committee, and it's chaired by Larry Bakken, who is right over here. And several of the members of the committee are here in the audience. And we have 2 of these a year, so first of all, I'll encourage you to look at the website and be ready and come back to our spring forum. We, of course, have no idea what the topic is yet, because that's what we're going to spend the next 6 months figuring out. But we have a great time, and anyone who, I've said to many of you who are regular attendees, we would love to have you join the planning committee, because you obviously have an interest in what we're trying to do, and you appreciate the result of the committee's work. I would also like to thank the Norway House board. Many of their members are here tonight. And in particular, Christina Carlton, who's the executive director, and Robin Cole. And Christine, don't be shy. Come on out. We'll do the book. No. They do all of the detail work that makes this happen. So we want to thank them. And the reason Christine is hovering here is because, as you probably saw when you came in the door, we have 2 books. When we come across a book that we think is good on a topic, we're going to try to make them available as we did at our spring program, through a lottery. And so we're going to pick 2 names. And I will tell you, I know that some of you maybe didn't put your name in because you looked at the book and went, oh my goodness. But even though it looks like a textbook, when I opened it, I went, ooh. But it actually reads much more like a journal article. I mean, it's really easy reading and enjoyable reading. It has lots of details and statistics. So even if you win it and you don't think you're going to appreciate it as much as you should, I would suggest you could give it to a politician, but that won't work. I would suggest you give it to a school where the next generation is coming up, and believe me, I think they're going to really make things happen in this area. So we're going to pull out 2 names. So your books are available right out at the table here. Okay, and then in closing, you've heard us mention Norway House many times. We are part of the Norway House, and the Norway House is also a place. Now, we hold our programs here, and it's a great place to hold a program. But we are waiting for the day when we will actually hold our programs in the Norway House. There's a capital campaign going on right now to build a new, to build a facility, but we have a facility, but it's too small for groups of this size. But I encourage you to come to the Norway House. We're located over on Franklin and 10th. And what I always say is got the best parking in town. If they ever sell that parking lot, we're in trouble. So you can always get in, you can park, it's free, it's great. They've got the gingerbread house display going on right now, which has been written up in the paper every year, and it's one of the best events that the Norway House does. And also, I want to acknowledge that the whole capital campaign for the Norway House was led very effectively by Jan Petersen, a very important member of our Norwegian American community. And he attended every one of our programs. He was always here and very supportive from the very first program. And as many of you may know, we lost Jan since our last program. So I would just want to acknowledge what an important part of our development he was, and we all miss him very much. And finally, I'd just like to thank you. We really appreciate your attending. We appreciate your great questions. I don't think our speakers are going to get out anytime soon based on all the questions that I see here. But we can only ask so many questions. But I encourage you to come up and ask our speakers any questions you have. We are going to make an effort on the website as we summarize the program to have, sort of how do you reach them? Instagram, their Twitter account, how do they want to be reached? Because right now, this is just the beginning of the conversation. The real conversation can continue, and so we encourage you to do that. And so thank you all very much for your attention and for coming. We hope you found it to be an interesting program. We hope we gave you enough that you leave thinking you know a lot more about this subject than when you came in the door. So everybody have a happy holiday, whatever holiday you're celebrating, and do come back to our spring program. We look forward to it. Thank you.